And now our talk on Procrastinate. Jerry Gennaria is a director of strategy at Toki Branding and Design, where he brings 25 years of experience in traditional and digital communications and a pragmatic approach to marketing and brand strategy. A dynamic presenter and storyteller, he enjoys making the complex simple and thrives on teaching and mentoring. Jerry's had a winding career path, but today his focus is on brand strategy and research. He's a graduate of Lindenwood University and an active St. Louis community member. He serves on he's the president actually of the Clayton Chamber of Commerce and serves on the board of the Regional Arts Commission. In addition to design, Jerry's artistic passion is photography. He's a world traveler, and his art has been in India, Japan, Europe, and across the American West. He shares his life with his wife, 2 cats, and an office filled with a curious collection of vintage technology, art, and atomic age infrared. Jerry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. All right, well, let me see if I can share my screen. All right, that's promising. Give me 1 second here. The screen's going to go black. Bear with me. All right, hopefully you all can see my screen now. I can't see you, so this is the fun of Zoom where you get to present to a blank screen. So Sam, can everyone see my screen?
Yes, it looks great.
All right, well, let's jump in. Thank you for inviting me to Creative Mornings. Thank you for the kind introduction, even if I did write it myself. This is just the recap, but I like the picture. This is me as a, I don't know, 10, 11-year-old nerd, and I'm still a nerd. And so when the topic of procrastination came up, and Sam asked me to speak, it didn't take long for me to think, well, yeah, that works because I am a procrastinator. I know it, and I always have been. In fact, if there was awards and medals and trophies and things for procrastination, I would probably have won all of them. So I'm certainly qualified from the perspective of being a procrastinator. We'll see whether or not there are some things to share with you that I've learned over the years about maybe overcoming procrastination. Overcoming procrastination is a bit more than a cottage industry. This is just the first page of the search results on Amazon for books on procrastination. I'm a little disturbed about the one that has Eat the Frog, but everybody seems to have some kind of a cure for procrastination. And if you're a procrastinator like me, you've probably tried to figure out the answer and the solution and figured that the problem is with you. There's something that you can do about it. And maybe that's not exactly correct. Maybe it's a little bit more complicated than that. So let's start with what is procrastination? Or maybe let's start with what is not procrastination. So I think a lot of folks think that procrastination is laziness. It's, putting off what you need to do today so that you can have some fun and not do the important things. Or maybe it's bad time management. It's just if I had better lists, if I had a better system. In fact, the only section of Amazon probably bigger than how to cure procrastination is the section on getting things done. And if you're like me, you've got stacks and stacks of notebooks and time management tools and little things for lists, and none of them really help you solve the problem of time management, because procrastination is not really bad time management. Some people will say that it's a character flaw. It's sort of related to laziness, but it's really a lot more complicated than being merely a character flaw. So what is it? Well, the dictionary will tell you that it just means to put off until tomorrow, or put off until a later time, something that you should do today. Tomorrow, that mystical land where 99% of all human productivity, motivation, and achievement is stored. If only we can get there, it's just another day away. And that's the most common definition for procrastination. But if we go back a little bit further, we get to the Greek akrasia, which means to do something against our better judgment. Procrastination is really a form of self-harm. It's irrational. It doesn't make any sense to do something you know is going to have negative consequences. And that starts to get a little closer to the core of what I think procrastination is about. So I want to take a little detour and share with you an article, a resource that I think everyone that is interested in this topic should read. If you're not familiar with Tim Urban and his website, Wait But Why, I highly encourage you to check it out. He's an amazing writer and thinker, and brings to life some of those concepts that are really difficult for us to sometimes put into words. In one of his most famous articles, and there's an accompanying TED Talk, is about procrastination. And I'm not going to go deep into what he has to say. I encourage you to go check it out for yourself. But he does have a little metaphor that I think is useful and valuable for us to think about as we talk about procrastination. So he thinks about the brain and the rational decision maker that lives inside of our brain. And we all have one of these. It's that part of the brain that is in control. It's the front part of the brain. It thinks about long-term things. We're all adults or attempting to adult. And so the rational decision maker is who we like to think is in charge. And as we sit down at our desk in the morning with whatever form of list of things to do that you utilize, that rational decision maker is in charge. And you've got that list and you've got your coffee and you are ready to take on the world until my favorite part, the instant gratification monkey shows up. And he's there, he lives in the back part of your brain, and he comes to the front, and the rational decision maker is in charge until the instant gratification monkey comes along and pushes the rational decision maker out of the way, takes control of the wheel. And the next thing you know, despite the fact that you know you need to be working on whatever that project is, you're no longer in control. That part of your brain is now in control, and it's off and running, and it's looking at everything except what you're supposed to be doing. YouTube rabbit holes, Wikipedia journeys, all of those things that we do when we should be doing something else. So self-awareness. One of the most important things about procrastinating is self-awareness. It's the part of procrastinating that makes us feel bad about it, makes us feel so rotten. When we procrastinate, we're not only aware that we're avoiding the task, but that doing so is probably a bad idea. The rational decision maker is still there, not tied up, just no longer in control. And so we continue to do the things anyway that we don't want to do. The work schedule. Procrastinate until you hate yourself. Then you do the work. Then you wonder why you waited so long. Then you repeat. That procrastinate until you hate yourself. That self-awareness of what is a problem is the most insidious part about procrastination. And it only compounds the negative associations that we have with the task. So it was already something we didn't want to do, or we'll talk about why we're not doing the task, but those feelings are still going to be there whenever we get back to it. But we're also going to have all this increased stress and anxiety and low self-esteem and self-blame and everything that goes along with the fact that we put that thing off for so long. We think about those as procrastinatory cognitions. Well, we don't. Scientists, researchers who spend their time thinking about this call these procrastinatory cognitions. It's our thoughts about procrastination that exacerbate our distress, which causes further procrastination. One leads to the other, which contributes to further procrastination. And so getting back to Tim Urban and the rational decision maker and the instant gratification monkey, we get to a point where the only thing that can interrupt the cycle is the panic monster. That's that deadline that comes along and causes everyone inside your brain to start screaming. And suddenly the instant gratification monkey takes a hike. The rational decision maker is back in control, but you've gone from having 8 hours to do the project to 30 minutes to do the project. that's not really an effective way to live our lives. And yet, for many of us who are procrastinators, it's exactly how we live our lives. So why? Why do we procrastinate? Well, it really boils down to a negative moods. An irrational cycle of chronic procrastination is generated by an inability to manage negative moods around a task. It's not a time management problem. It's not a character flaw. It's not laziness. It's an emotion regulation problem. And those emotions are varied, and it depends on what the task is. What is that aversion that we have to it? It might be distasteful. We might be bored with it. We might have anxiety about it, insecurity, frustration with it. We might resent something about that task. We might have self-doubt. We might be apathetic about it. We might just be confused. But all of those things cause these negative emotions. And that's just, a few of the things that might cause negative moods that cause us to put off and procrastinate that task. And then there's a second thing, and that's the part where present Jerry doesn't care about future Jerry. That instant gratification monkey, the instant part of it is what is most important. Again, scientists call this temporal disjunction. On a neural level, we perceive our future selves more like strangers than as parts of ourselves. When we procrastinate, the part of our brain that thinks about these tasks we're putting off and those accompanying negative feelings that await us on the other side assumes that those are somebody else's problem, except the somebody else is you. So to make things even worse, we're unable to make thoughtful, future-oriented decisions in the midst of stress. We have that back part of our brain, you might call it the lizard brain. Scientists will tell you that it's the amygdala, the threat detector part of the brain, perceives the task because of those negative moods as being a real, genuine threat. And in this case, it's a threat to our self-esteem or to our well-being. And so the brain jumps in. Scientists call it amygdala hijack, and it just immediately takes care of the threat that's in front of it. That long-term future tomorrow threat is less important than the one that's sneaking up out of the shadows about to attack you. So temporal disjunction, negative emotions, these things work together to create the chronic cycle of procrastination that many of us live with. So how do we break the cycle? Well, to start with, we have to understand the root cause. We have to realize at its core, procrastination is about emotions, not about productivity. The solution isn't to download a time management app or to learn some new strategy for self-control. It has to do with how we manage our emotions and finding new ways to manage those negative feelings that we have about the task or the project in front of us. One of the most important things that we can do is simply to forgive ourselves. Take the opportunity to break the cycle of self-recrimination that perpetuates procrastination by saying, it's okay. I procrastinated. Now it's time to get back on the horse. It's time to move forward. There was another study in 2010 with a bunch of college students who procrastinated studying for a first exam. And when some of them practiced self-forgiveness about that procrastination, it allowed them to move past their previous bad behavior and focus on the upcoming exam without being burdened by those past acts. And if we realize that this is a self-perpetuating cycle around these emotions, then the first thing we have to do is forgive ourselves. The second thing we have to do is really examine ourselves. So if it's emotion that's causing us distress, then we have to pay attention to what those emotions are. When we're in the moment of procrastinating, we have to take a look inside ourselves at the sensations that are arising in our mind and our body, and think about what are the feelings that are really eliciting that temptation to procrastinate. Where do you feel them? What is it reminding you of? What is the thought that you're observing when you look inside yourself? Does it intensify when you look at it? Does it start to dissipate when you look at it? Does it cause other emotions to arise? So how are these sensations shifting as you examine them? Can you identify what that emotion is that's causing you distress. What is it about that project that that you find distasteful? Is it the blank page that's in front of you? Is it the repetition of doing the same thing over and over again? Is it the fact that the trash can is overflowing and who wants to deal with the smell? Whatever it is, there's some sort of negative emotion that's involved in each of those things. And we need to look within ourselves so that, first of all, we can identify it. And once we identify it, then we can reframe. We can reframe that task by focusing on the positive aspects. And sometimes that's easier said than done. Sometimes we look at it and there isn't a lot of positive. But if you look past the actual task itself and think about maybe a time when you did something similar and it turned out okay, or maybe you can think about the beneficial outcome that's going to happen from completing that task, or even what is your boss or your partner or somebody else in your life going to say when you show them the finished work. Maybe that's what's causing the anxiety, but maybe that's also the reward. So how will you feel about yourself? What's the positive emotion that you can associate with completing that task? I don't know how many of you have seen the Bill Murray movie, What About Bob? But Bob in the movie is filled with the kinds of anxieties that cause us to procrastinate. And in the movie, he goes to Vermont, I believe, to see this famous psychiatrist who's written a book called Baby Steps. And through the course of the movie, Bob learns how to baby step himself on the path to recovery. Funny movie, but the point about baby steps is really important. If we limit our focus to the next task, the next granular part of what we need to do, not the I need to write this paper, I need to create this presentation, I need to design this brochure, I need to write this song, but instead think about what is the most granular thing that I need to do. I need to open Word, I need to put the date on it, I need to choose a template for my presentation. What's that bite-sized chunk that you can think about? And thinking about just that single next action helps us calm our nerves. It creates kind of a layer of self-deception. At the start of a given task, you can think about what's the next action as just a mere possibility. It's sort of like being a method actor. If I was going to work on this task, what's the next action that I would take? Even though maybe I'm not going to, but what would I do if I were going to work on this task? Maybe it means you'd open your email or you'd put the date at the top of the document. But in this case, don't wait to be in the mood to do that part of the task. Just go ahead and do that little part of it, because frequently that part of the task is not what's causing you the aversion to the task. It's not about opening Word. It's not about putting the date on it. It's about what you have to write next. But by starting, motivation follows action. If you get started, you'll find that your motivation often follows. So what else can we do? We can change our circumstances. So procrastination is a cycle. There are go-to things for most of us, whether it's reading Reddit, doing a deep dive into YouTube, discovering all the causes of the War of 1812 on Wikipedia, whatever it is that is your go-to for avoiding the task at hand. Make those temptations more inconvenient. Is it social media? Is it getting on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or what have you? Make those things a little bit harder to do. Hide your phone, delete the apps from your phone. Just create some friction in between the things that are easiest for the instant gratification monkey to run to. And it makes it a little bit easier to stay on task for what you're trying to do. The second thing is make good decisions easier. So sometimes the thing that you want to do has a few steps along the way. You want to go to the gym, you want to get out and run in the morning. So how do I make that a little bit easier? It might be dumb. Your partner might hate it, but maybe you need to go to sleep in your exercise clothes so that it's one less thing that you have to think about. In fact, you're actually creating a little bit of friction, because if you want to avoid going out for the run, you've got to take off your shoes and you've got to face the person who has to take off their shoes and take off their running clothes, rather than looking at that running clothes and the shoes sitting over there in the corner and saying, yeah, I really don't have time for that. I need to get to something else. So um, put some roadblocks in front of the things that you want to avoid, and remove roadblocks from positive action. So ultimately, you want to create antidotes to negative emotions. You want to address those negative moods that we talked about earlier. So what are some tactics and solutions that we can do to avoid some of those negative moods? So one of the first things that you can do is think about your goal setting. So let's go back to time management for a second, and whatever your favorite form of time management is. I've tried all of them at one point or another, whether it's digital apps like Things, or systems like Getting Things Done, or what I typically use because it's the simplest, least amount of friction, which is a simple piece of paper and a list on it. But what you write on the list is often as important as having the list, and having smarter goals is more important. Saying I'm going to write a novel in November is not a really good goal. You want to have something that is more specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. So I'm going to write the first paragraph of my novel on November 1st at 8 o'clock. Might be something that helps you get a little bit further down the line. And speaking of smart goals and time bound, create a deadline. So use the panic monster to help overcome the instant gratification monkey. Create an artificial, if you need it, deadline, because we all know that the one thing that actually helps us get things done is a deadline. When you have to speak at Creative Mornings, you eventually get a presentation done. When the trash has to go out, you eventually get the trash out. When you have a project due at work, you eventually get it done. But the real question is, are you spending enough time on it to do something that is work you're proud of, and work that makes you feel positive about yourself? Or are you cramming it all into the last minute? Are you giving due consideration to the work, or are you waiting until 24 hours before the paper is due and then staying up all night? We've all been there, but make the deadlines work for you. Think about that project that you want to get done and create a deadline. And don't just write a deadline on a piece of paper. I'm going to do X by a certain date. If like me, you're a photographer and you want to have a gallery show, don't say I'm going to have a gallery show on November 1st. No, go and do everything necessary so that you are on a calendar where people are going to show up to see your photos hanging on a wall on November 1st. I don't know why I'm focused on November 1st, but we'll go with it. So create something that you can't avoid. You can't reset and you can't delete, because you're making yourself accountable. And sometimes that is in the form of a deadline, and sometimes it's in maybe the form of an announcement to others that you are working on this thing, and now the other folks are going to be looking to you to complete that work. So you've created, if not a temporal deadline, at least one where people are going to be looking to you to deliver on that work. And it creates, in both cases, it creates a version of that panic monster that can help keep your procrastination at bay. I also like to think about using procrastination to get things done. So sometimes we might call that procrasto work. So if I'm really trying to avoid cleaning my office, sometimes the best way to clean my office is to use it as the way that I'm procrastinating for something else. And the great thing is if you manage these tasks well, some of them allow you the time to think, right? So you don't want to go for a run, but you also don't want to work on that project. You really need to spend some time thinking your way through the project. Running is a perfect time to do that, so you can avoid the bigger aversion or negative mood or emotion by going and doing this other thing that you don't like to do either. And so you can manage a little bit. I think it's kind of cheating, but it's smart cheating. Another thing is sometimes it really is a bit of a time management problem, and we just need to learn to say no more often. We need to look at, can I realistically get these things done? And sometimes we create our own messes, right? We have many things that we need to get done. We procrastinate a bit, and then suddenly all of these things have stacked up. And so no longer are you procrastinating, you're working flat out because maybe you procrastinated a while ago, and now all of these things that you said yes to are starting to stack up. And maybe saying yes to too many things is one of those negative emotions. It's creating anxiety about being able to get all of those things done. So think about your priorities. Obviously, we all have things that we can't avoid. We can't avoid taking care of our families. We can't avoid things at our job. But maybe there are some things with both family and job where we can say, no, I'm not going to do that. Or we can say, it's okay if I just don't get to that right now. I'm not going to put that on the list of things to do. I know eventually it needs to get done, but I'm going to say no to that. Or I'm going to find another way to get that done. Maybe I need to pay somebody else to do that distasteful task because I can better spend my time on something else. So figure out how to say no more often. But of course, this is Creative Mornings. So I wanted to speak a little bit here at the end about some thoughts specifically for creative procrastinators, because I think sometimes the things that we're avoiding, the negative emotions that we're facing as creatives, are a little bit even, maybe a little bit more deeper in our souls. Procrastination teaches us, I think, to do 30 minutes of work in 8 hours, or take 8 hours of work and cram it into 30 minutes. And that's just not a good way to work. So how do we overcome creative anxiety? It's the thing that we all face when we have something that we need to write, something that we need to design, something that we need to plan. All those creative things bring to the surface a whole list of negative emotions and anxiety. Am I good enough? Can I really do this? Are people going to like it when I'm done? Is it going to meet people's needs? I'm not as good as the other person. I'm going to be doing this design and it's going to be hanging up on a wall, and somebody else is going to be better at it. It may be confusion, right? How many times have we been thrown a project with little or no information to go on, expected to figure it out, and then you just sit there spinning because you don't know how to start. You don't know where you're supposed to go with it. And so in the end, it becomes easier to kick that can down the road. The confusion, the turmoil that you're facing because you don't have enough information is almost as bad as any of the other kinds of emotions that we have. So we have to think about ways as creatives that we can start to work our way into that project. One of the interesting things is, once you get started, I said earlier, motivation follows action. Once we get started on a project, the deeper into the project that we get, the more excited about it, the clearer the path, the more that we start to get into the flow of it, the easier it is to avoid further procrastination. Frequently, it's the start that is the biggest problem. And once we're into it, we can avoid most of those things that are trying to, those negative emotions that are trying to derail us. So one of the things that I think is a really great place to start is just do something. Sketch something badly. We design, we write, we photograph, we create with this idea of creating something amazing. And amazing is hard. It's really hard and it's intimidating. But doing something bad is not intimidating. Everyone can do it. They do it all the time. In fact, people go through life gleefully doing things that are bad, not even knowing that it is bad. Gianluca Gemini, and I highly suggest that you go and look up Velocipedia. If you just do a search, you'll find this, or the link is there underneath the image. Did a project, and I think maybe it's an ongoing project, where he asked people to draw from memory a men's bicycle. And the things that people draw are terrible. And he's an architect and designer, and so he creates CAD drawings and models, 3D models, digital models of what these people created. They're not you can't ride these bicycles. You know, if you look at the one that's on here now, there's no chainstay. If you sit on this bicycle, it's probably going to collapse underneath of you, and it's certainly not going to go anywhere. But these people have absolutely no problem with just sketching something, no matter how bad it is. We get so caught up in doing it well, doing it right, doing the best, that we can't even get something on a piece of paper on the screen. So just sketch, doodle, make some marks, get a pen in your hand, get the paper in front of you, and just start making marks on the paper. Sometimes the very act of doing that allows you to clear your mind and start to think your way through the problem. Sometimes you might just go and do a search on Shutterstock for the images that you might use in the project. The searching in a specific creative space like Shutterstock that pushes a lot of the other distractions out of the way is the beginning of the work, the beginning of the project. Create yourself a mood board of those images if you need. Sometimes doing the opposite of what your project is can help you get started on it. So do you need to design something? Well, maybe you should start by writing. Write the things, an outline of what all the elements are that need to be in the design. What do you know about the design? Take the creative brief if you've received one, or the 3 or 4 pieces of information, and write down what you know, and write down what that makes you think of next, and write down the questions that you have. But just start writing before you start designing, and suddenly that act of creation, even though it's not the project, that very act of creation adjacent to the project lets you get started working on it. Do you need to write something? Then try designing. When I need to write a presentation, sometimes the first thing that I do, even if it's not important in any way at all, is I'll design the template for it, because the act of creating, the act of starting to put it together and think about the structure of the thing that I'm making, allows me to start getting my thoughts together and start writing. If you're a photographer, you're so worried about getting the right photo, just go take some bad photos. Go to wherever it is that you want to shoot, or the subject, and just start taking photos. And eventually that act of creation is going to help you channel your creative thinking and begin to avoid procrastination, because you're already starting to do something. But most of all, just be kind to yourself. We all suffer in some way, shape, or form. At least most of us, I think all of us that are on this Zoom today, suffer from the challenges of procrastination. Recognize in yourself what it is about the project. What are those negative moods? Be self-aware of them, and look for ways that you can overcome them. Just do a little bit to get started. So thank you all for your kind attention. If you want to find me, I'm online on Twitter and Instagram occasionally. You can reach me by email at Toki, or if you want to see some of my work, you can see it at my website.
Thanks, Jerry. And feel free, you guys, if you want to put your question in the chat, we'll ask you to unmute and ask Jerry a question.
I'm just going to ask a question.
Hi, Joy.
Hey, Jerry. I often say that I went into this profession specifically because I need a deadline to get anything done. And I just wondered, was this originally, did your line of thinking begin because this was something that you struggled with, or was it because you noticed that your coworkers were like, what was the seed of this talk?
It's because I struggle with it. At the very beginning, I am a procrastinator. I have always been. So I've done college twice. The first time I went to seminary, and I remember taking the hardest course you take in seminary is systematic theology. And the main paper at the end of the semester is like a 25-page paper. I think it's a sophomore class. And I was working full time and taking a full load, but I was also just didn't know where to go with this paper. And like a lot of projects, I put it off and I put it off. And in the end, I ended up writing the paper in the 48 hours before it was due. I did not sleep during that time. I lived in the library and in front of my, it was technically a computer, I guess, way before Macs and things that we have today. But, sprinting toward the finish. It worked out okay that time. Could it have been a lot better? Yes. Was it good enough? Apparently. But yeah, I procrastinated since, since I was a kid. It's just, I think it's ingrained in some of us. And still do. I just try to manage it with having, some of the tips that you saw.
One more thing, and then I'm going to mute myself. There's a book by Anne Lamott called Bird by Bird, which I thought of when you started, which was the first time I was just, you don't have to have the whole sculpture out of the marble. Just start chipping away.
Right.
So anyway, it was great. Thank you.
Sure thing.
Thanks for your questions, Joy. I agree, Jerry. I love that you said sketch something. I think as creatives, we have the advantage of producing, using our creativity to do something,
right,
and just getting started. I think sketching is just another way of thinking through something. And sometimes we need to use a different language to be able to get some thoughts out on paper. So that's great.
I think if out of all of this, that's the most important technique or tool that I could give to this group in particular, because a lot of times our procrastination is a reflection of our anxiety about the project, whether that's anxiety about how we perceive ourselves, what we think the work is going to be at the end of it, or a lot of times, and I've had some conversations with folks, and even recently, we are not getting enough information, right? We don't have enough information to solve the problem. And so we're problem solvers, and people are expecting us to solve those problems in shorter and shorter amounts of time. And that causes a tremendous ball of anxiety to build up inside of us. So using some of those techniques, like writing down what you know and what you don't know, giving yourself permission to just go ask questions and push back. That's a variation on saying no. It's not saying, no, I won't do this project. It's saying, no, I won't do this project until you give me enough information to actually get started on it.
Yeah, knowing your parameters is pretty important. We have some comments in the chat, no questions yet, but people are saying, L. Dennis, I'm not sure her first name, but great talk with great tips. Matt West is still learning to say no.
Aren't we all?
Yep. I like that you said, breaking down tasks into bite-sized pieces. But I wonder, sometimes for me, doing something and thinking about the bigger picture also helps motivate me. Like, oh, I know I have to do this administrative thing that I don't like doing, but I know overall it's going to help this goal or mission or the project overall. So I think it's a little bit of both as well.
Absolutely. I think everybody has to understand what works for them. And everybody needs to understand what is actually what's the negative emotion about this particular task. It's not the same for every task, right? So understanding why it is that you're avoiding the task is fundamental, and understanding what's the reward. So I think you looking at the big picture and thinking about how this is going to benefit you down the line, that's one good method to think about your future self. And do something kind to your future self.
Matt's talking about imposter syndrome. So is Alicia. I think that's something all creatives struggle with. Jerry, how do you deal with imposter syndrome?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you, it never goes away. No matter how long you do it, no matter what your title is or your position or where you are, it never goes away. Toki is, many of you are familiar with Toki. It's I think one of St. Louis's premier design firms, if not the premier design firm, if I can brag a little. When I joined 2 years ago, it was incredibly intimidating. It was always sort of that shining light on the hill of where I imagined working. And, so imposter syndrome is going to follow you no matter what. In fact, I would actually tell you that imposter syndrome is a good thing. If you get past imposter syndrome, if you get to the point where it's like, I got this, you're not learning, you're not growing, you're not stretching, you're not becoming everything that you can be. So you should always be in a position of having enough confidence, but not being completely confident. It makes us stretch and push. Hi, Rashida.
I think that's great. I think what you just said is also part of forgiving yourself too. I like that you were giving us permission to say, okay, this is okay. We can get past this. I'm not feeling maybe I'm up to the job, but I know I'm going to do this and be able to move forward just through that level of understanding. So something I've heard before that I'll ask about is, I think that sometimes there's that stress sweet spot. If you're going through something and there's not that pressure, you might not get to, the best work, or you might be just like, moving through something and not excited about it. But then you get that little bit of pressure and it starts sparking some new ideas. However, if you wait too long, then you are so stressed out that you can't think of anything.
Mm-hmm.
So something I've heard about is like this stress sweet spot, and that's where all the magic happens. But
yeah, so I think that's really interesting because deadlines are they're super solid and incredibly fuzzy. And what I mean by that is the date something is due is very, very solid. The amount of time that you think that you need between now and that deadline to complete the work is very, very fuzzy. So one of the things that comes with experience and that you can try to rely on a little bit more is how long it actually takes you to complete certain kinds of projects. Because the more that you understand yourself and how long it really takes, the more that you can use that sweet spot of pressure. Because if you think the project is going to take you 30 minutes and you wait until 30 minutes before it's due, you are probably wrong, and you are definitely going to panic to the point where it's almost impossible to do anything. But if you know that it's a 6-hour project, and yes, 12 hours would be better, or having it off my plate 2 days ago would be better, but I can at least wait until 6 hours before the project and know that I have enough time to get it done. That may be a little bit better way to apply that kind of deadline pressure in a more effective way. But that takes experience, I think.
Great question in the chat. Do you want to unmute and ask your question?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jerry. I was wondering, these are great methods and techniques as far as like internalizing procrastination, and I was wondering how you use it kind of externally, how you kind of use these techniques in a team environment, or how someone can facilitate these methods in a group.
Yeah, so I think there's two things in particular that you can do in a group that's very effective. One goes back to that idea of accountability that I mentioned earlier. It's making sure that there's other people on the team that know that you're working on, because we all have these projects that don't have a deadline. And putting a deadline on them may not make sense. So what I like to do to utilize a group is share with the group something that I'm working on, creating an expectation that I'm actually doing it, and those occasional questions about, hey, how's such and such coming along? And that provides some motivation. The other thing with a group that I think is really valuable is work together. So if you can create a little bit of that artificial deadline by using your calendar, right? If you're working with someone else on a project, maybe it's a writer and a designer working together, it's a couple designers working together, or whatever it is, by putting time on the calendar when you both have to show up to the same place, virtual or physical, doesn't really matter, and you're going to work on this project together, you are first holding each other accountable. There's now a time where I have to be in the same place to get started on this project. And you can use that time to help break through some of those initial problems that create negative emotions. Maybe it's about not understanding the problem that you're trying to solve. Use that time together to reframe the problem. Katie and I'll pick on Katie for a second, do this all the time. We have a presentation coming up. Maybe it's a pitch. Maybe it's a project that we're working on. We get together, and I don't know if that's helping her, but it's certainly helping me to work together on, just frame this out. It's like, I don't know where to start. What do we need to do? Between the two of us, there's, some idea of a way in. And by the time we get done with 30 minutes or an hour or whatever it is of working together, we're that much further down the line of getting the project done, and the motivation starts to kick in to get the project done. So I think those are two ways that you can use the team to help overcome procrastination.
I think that's great. Something I've done before is do like a kickoff charrette and just try to get down as many things as possible in an hour. And usually people are very surprised with how much work they just got done. And then they have a starting point.
It's the group version of sketching. Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Great advice. Any last questions for Jerry? Feel free to unmute. All right. Well, Jerry, great advice. And I think also besides tools and advice, there was some really good understanding in the fourth thought of that talk that we can take and use as well, just to even understand ourselves better. One of my favorite talks is understanding your creative conditions and what makes you feel creative. And this was kind of the reverse of that, understanding what makes you not feel creative. So it's just making sure that you're aware of those things to be able to combat them and really create a great creative environment for yourself. So thank you guys for joining. We at Creative Mornings host talks every month, so we look forward to seeing you again. Make sure to follow Jerry, follow Creative Mornings on Facebook, Instagram, all of the medias, and we will see you next month. Happy Friday, everybody.
Thank you all for your attention.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.